Long before the world knew him as a prophet, Muhammad ibn Abdullah was already admired as Al-Amin, the trustworthy and the honest, a successful merchant, a beloved husband to Khadija, and a man whose dignity shone in a city drowning in corruption. Muhammad never once bowed to an idol, nor stained his heart with the false gods of Arabia. His soul remained pure, waiting for a great mission. But behind this noble man was a life shaped by hardship. Orphaned before he could even know his father, and losing his mother at just 6 years old, Muhammad was raised under the protection of his grandfather and later his uncle. At the time, Arabia was lost, its tribes torn by endless wars, its people clinging to idols, 360 of them surrounding the Kaaba, once the house of Abraham. Women were mistreated, and the poor were forgotten, and superstitions ruled every heart. But not Muhammad. Even as a young man, he turned away from idol worship. He never bowed to a stone, nor called on lifeless statues. In his heart, there was always one God. Arabia needed light, and soon God will choose Muhammad to carry it. As Muhammad was about to enter his 40s, his heart longed for solitude. The noise of Mecca, its idols, its injustice, its greed, weighed heavy on him. He found peace only in the stillness of the mountains. Each year, in the months of Ramadan, he withdrew to a cave called Hira in Mountain Nur. Overlooking the Kaaba, alone in the silence, he worshipped not with rituals of idols, but with pure devotion, reflecting on the skies above and the earth below and the one creator behind it all. And then one night, everything changed. At the age of 40, in the Cave of Hira, a presence filled the darkness. A man, yet not like any man, appeared suddenly at the entrance. There was no sound of footsteps and no warnings. He was simply there, with a parchment in his hand. He came closer to Muhammad and said,
"Read."
Muhammad replied, "I cannot read." The man gripped him tightly until he could hardly breathe, and again said,
"Read."
Again Muhammad answered, "I cannot read." A third time the man embraced him and said,
"Read in the name of your Lord who created man from a clot. Read, and your Lord is the most generous, who taught by the pen, taught man what he never knew."
And at that moment, the man just disappeared. Shaken to his core, Muhammad fled from the cave. He rushed home to Khadija, crying out, "Cover me, cover me." She wrapped him in blankets. Her voice calm and full of love, she assured him,
"By Allah, He will never disgrace you. You uphold family ties. You care for the poor. You honor your guests. And you help those in need."
Her words soothed his fear. And Khadija did more than just comfort him. She guided him. She took him to her cousin, Waraqah ibn Nawfal, a man of deep knowledge who had studied the earlier scriptures. He was elderly, nearly blind, but wise in the teachings of Moses and Jesus. When Muhammad told him about the man in the cave, Waraqah's face lit up with recognition. He said,
"That was the same angel who came to Moses. You are the prophet of this nation."
But Waraqah warned Muhammad.
"Your people will drive you out."
Shocked, Muhammad asked, "Will they drive me out?" And Waraqah replied,
"Never has a man come with what you bring except he was opposed. If I live to see that day, I will stand by your side."
The revelation had begun. Muhammad's life and the history of the world would never be the same again. After the Cave of Hira, the words of God began to descend piece by piece. At first, Muhammad was ordered to keep the message private. Only a few hearts answered the call: his wife Khadija and their children, his young cousin Ali, his loyal friend Abu Bakr, and few others. In secret gatherings, they prayed together, whispering the name of the one God, while the rest of Mecca slept. And then came the command: warn your closest kin. Muhammad climbed Mount Safa and called his people to abandon idols and worship only Allah. But Mecca's leaders, guardians of the idols, raged against him. The more he called, the harsher their opposition grew. The believers were tortured. Bilal, the humble slave, was dragged across the burning sand, and a huge stone was placed on his chest. Yet his lips only whispered, Ahad, Ahad, one, one. Sumayya and her husband, Yasir, and their son Ammar were also tortured, and she became the first martyr in Islam. The Prophet himself was mocked, stoned, and rejected, and the believers suffered more when Abu Talib died. The Prophet's heart was struck by tragedy. His beloved Khadija passed away. Soon after, his uncle Abu Talib, his protector, also died. That year was called the Year of Grief, but in his sorrow, God honored him with a miracle: the night journey from Mecca to Jerusalem, and then ascension through the heavens. There, he was given the gift of prayer, a rope that would connect his followers to God 5 times a day. For 13 years in Mecca, the call was resisted, and the Muslims were persecuted and tortured. Yet, every pilgrimage season, tribes from across Arabia came to Mecca, and Muhammad, peace be upon him, reached out to them with the message of Islam. Some turned away, mocking him, while others listened, but feared the anger of Quraysh. But far to the north, in Yathrib, a city torn by rivalry between tribes, the message found open hearts. In the 11th year of prophethood, 6 men from Yathrib heard Muhammad's words. They returned home carrying the light of Islam. The next year, more came. At a place called Aqaba, 12 men pledged their faith. They promised to worship none but Allah, to abandon sin, and to stand by the Prophet as their guide. This was the first pledge of Aqaba. A year later, in secret and under the cover of the night, over 70 men and women from Yathrib gathered at Aqaba. They pledged not only their faith, but their protection. They swore to defend Muhammad, peace be upon him, as they would defend their own families. This was the second pledge of Aqaba. It was a promise of loyalty and the turning of history's tide. With this pledge, the people of Yathrib, later will be called Medina, invited Muhammad to their city, a safe home for the believers and a new beginning. But Quraysh grew desperate. Plots were whispered in the night, plans to kill Muhammad before his message could spread. And so, under God's command, the Prophet prepared for the greatest journey of his life, the Hijrah, the migration to Medina. The migration was a turning point, and in Medina, Muhammad, peace be upon him, built a new society, founded on justice and brotherhood, where Muslims lived side by side with other faiths under one charter. But the enemies of Islam would not let the Muslims live in peace. At Badr, outnumbered and poorly armed, the believers stood firm, and God granted them victory. At Uhud, disobedience brought loss and heartbreak, and the Prophet, peace be upon him himself, was wounded. At the trench, Medina was surrounded by disbelievers, but unity and faith saved the city. In the 6th year after the Hijrah, Muhammad, peace be upon him, and his companions set out for Mecca, not for war, but for pilgrimage. They came in peace, dressed in the simple white garments of worship. But Quraysh blocked their paths at Hudaybiyyah. There, a treaty was signed. Though it seemed unfair, demanding the Muslims to return without completing their pilgrimage and restricting them in many ways, the Prophet agreed. The companions struggled with the terms, but Muhammad, peace be upon him, saw beyond the moment. The Treaty of Hudaybiyyah was not a loss. It was the first step towards victory, for in peace, the message of Islam spread faster than ever before. But after years have passed and new tribes entered Islam, Quraysh could not keep their word. When their allies broke the treaty and attacked a Muslim-allied tribe, the truth was shattered, and the Prophet had every right to respond. And so, in the 8th year after the Hijrah, Muhammad, peace be upon him, marched to Mecca, tens of thousands strong. Yet he entered the city with his head bowed in humility. Those who had once mocked him, tortured his followers, and driven him from his home, now stood before him in fear. But instead of revenge, the Prophet said, "No blame will be upon you today. Go, for you are free." Then the Kaaba was cleansed of idols, and the worship of one God was restored. In the final pilgrimage, Muhammad, peace be upon him, addressed the largest gathering of his life. He spoke of justice, equality, the rights of women, and the unity of all believers as one brotherhood, and more. But shortly after, he fell ill. Surrounded by his family, and his head resting on Aisha's shoulders, the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, breathed his last. At the age of 63, his mission on earth was complete. He left behind no wealth, no palace or throne. He left only the message of Islam, a light to guide mankind. From the deserts of Arabia, it spread across the world, and to this day, over 1 billion hearts echo his words. There is no God but Allah, and Muhammad is his messenger. Subscribe and follow us for more stories about the prophets in Islam.